They told her to wait outside the flight brief. No explanation, no seat at the table, just a clipboard in her lap and a closed door behind it. The launch roster had already been filled. Her name wasn't on it. Not anymore. Most of the crew assumed she had washed out weeks earlier. One bad sim, they said, one delay in judgment, so they gave her the backseat, or nothing at all. But halfway through the sortie, something went wrong. And when it did, the voices on the comms changed. Orders turned into questions. Assumptions unraveled. And then, everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The flight deck moved like a living machine. Crews called out positions across the catwalks, yellow vests weaving between fuel lines, arrestor cables, and wheel chocks under the early light. Below the tower, the lineup of A-18 Super Hornets glinted with salt spray, each one waiting to be cleared for launch. It was organized chaos, but to Kendall, it felt distant, like a movie projected behind glass. She moved down the center spine of the carrier, helmet clipped under one arm, gloves looped neatly through her belt. Her patch read, Observer, Non-Certified. Block letters just below her name. No one saluted. No one spoke. She passed two ordnance techs who didn't bother hiding their glance. One nudged the other and whispered something about a tourist. She didn't react. She never did. Kendall crossed the deck toward Jet 509, where Lieutenant Price leaned against the ladder, all swagger and ease. His flight suit looked freshly pressed, his sleeves rolled halfway to the forearms like he was waiting for cameras that hadn't arrived yet. He grinned when he saw her, all charm and polished teeth. "Hope you enjoy the view. Wheels up," he said, stepping aside with exaggerated courtesy. "No buttons to press back there, but I'm sure you'll find something to do." She nodded once, then climbed up without answering. The cockpit smelled of hydraulic oil and heat from the morning sun. She set her helmet on the seat edge and ran the checklist from muscle memory. Electrical sync, altimeter alignment. She ran through it all even though no one had asked her to, even though the stick wasn't hers. They had pulled her after one simulated carrier approach in adverse weather. She'd caught the glide slope too low, didn't throttle up in time, and waved off hard. The gear was late to cycle. She tried to correct. The hook missed. Fuel margin dropped to 1.7, and that was enough for the instructor to call her unstable under pressure. The report used phrases like insufficient arrestor confidence and delayed recovery logic. She knew exactly what that meant. It meant she had refused to eject just because protocol said so. She had tried to save the plane. She had calculated her chances and committed. But they didn't want pilots who made decisions that way. They wanted compliance. Kendall folded her checklist and tucked it into the kneeboard slot. Below her, the deck crews finished loading the final wing tank. No one looked up. One of them slapped the hull lightly like it was good luck and moved on. She stayed quiet, scanning the weatherboard, clip behind the seat. Wind cross at 14 knots, ceiling at 800 feet, humidity high. No one mentioned turbulence, but she noted it anyway. Lieutenant Price hoisted himself up into the forward seat, whistling a tune she didn't recognize. He toggled his mic on before flipping any switches. "Showtime," he said into the radio, then looked back at her. "You ready to learn how the real ones fly?" She replied calmly, "My system's green." That was all. He didn't say anything after that. He didn't need to. His job was the stick. Hers was to watch. The pre-flight checks passed smoothly. Price joked with the tower, laughing too loud. She sat back, tightened her harness, and said nothing. Her gloves were still looped at her belt, untouched. No one had told her to wear them. From the outside, she looked like part of the crew. From inside, she felt like a ghost with a headset. 8 months of training, 4 check rides, over 100.0 hours in the sim, all of it erased with a single debriefing that lasted 5 minutes. One line at the end had stuck with her more than the rest. Observer status until further review. It had sounded clinical, but she knew what it meant. Don't touch anything. Don't speak unless addressed. Don't be seen trying. Still, she had studied every system on the A-18 Super Hornet, memorized the fault trees, the fuel feed timings, the emergency resets, not because she was trying to impress anyone, because it was what she was good at, because she loved the aircraft, even when it didn't love her back. Someone shouted from the flight deck. Kendall looked out past the canopy and watched another bird launch clean into the mist. The sound of jet wash pulsed against the hull. Lieutenant Price snapped his visor down. She reached for her gloves and slipped them on quietly. Just in case. She didn't expect to be called on today, but she knew exactly where the emergency override was. She always did. Kendall sat in the rear seat of the A-18 Super Hornet, eyes flicking between the multifunction display and the analog standby gauges. The sky outside pulsed with early haze as they leveled out of the initial climb. Lieutenant Price handled the stick with a kind of casual swagger, lazy throttle work. A touch too much yaw correction, always just slightly late on radio response. She didn't comment. She was there to observe, not advise. Altitude held steady at 21,000 feet, but his roll into the next waypoint was shallow. She made a mental note. Wind vector had shifted 5 degrees left since takeoff. He hadn't accounted for it. Not that it mattered now. A small pause hit the cockpit. Then something off. Price didn't complete the next check. His hand slackened on the throttle. The radio call-out stopped mid-phrase. His left glove slipped from the grip and landed near the rudder pedal. Kendall looked forward sharply. No head movement, no response. She reached for the comms. Pilot unresponsive. Taking control. No answer. She toggled to tower frequency. Flight 0509er. Rear seat taking command. Front pilot is unresponsive. A burst of static. Then nothing. The controller's voice arrived half a second too late. Say again. Kendall, you're what you're not cleared to. She had already taken the stick. The FA-18 eased into level flight under her grip. Trim felt tail-heavy. She countered. Fuel tank pressure flickered on the board. She reached for the backup check and began reading off systems gear. Hook, hydraulic pressure, oxygen bleed. The gear lever didn't respond. No green lights. She toggled the manual override. Still nothing. Her voice was even. Landing gear not deploying. Hook non-responsive. Another voice cut in from tower. Copy 0509er. Confirm emergency status. Recommend holding pattern. Barrier is offline. Kendall answered calmly. Unable to hold. Fuel reading critical. Below 90 seconds at current draw. Repeat. The voice rose. You say 90 seconds. Affirmative. Fuel below 90 seconds. Behind her, the instruments kept humming. A faint static buzz passed through the headset. No one from the command deck answered immediately. When they did, the tone was urgent. We don't have the cables reset. Emergency barrier is under repair. Visibility on deck at 40 meters. Abort if able. Kendall didn't respond. She reset the angle of approach and began running landing profile options in her head. 100.0 knots stall at current weight. Headwind would shave 6. Deck pitch was unknown. She adjusted for worst case. The carrier sat somewhere beneath the cloud line, cloaked in fog and frantic voices. In the front seat, Price slumped against his harness. The autopilot was off. Everything was manual now. Her hands moved smoothly over the controls, nose pitch steady, airspeed controlled. She watched the range counter dip, the numbers bleeding out faster than the minutes. Fuel dropped below 50 seconds. Flight 0509er. Tower called again, now louder. Abort. No barrier. Repeat. Abort. We cannot catch you. Kendall replied, Copy. I cannot divert. I am preparing for straight-in approach. Run checklist. There was a pause. You are not authorized to fly this aircraft. Someone snapped. It wasn't the tower. It was command frequency. I'm already flying it, she answered. The line went quiet. She toggled through her emergency notes, verifying engine temperature, bleed valves, hydraulic backup, all green. She extended flaps, trimmed elevator, and reached forward to try the gear one final time. Nothing. Hook lights stayed dark. Still, Her tone did not change. "Approach vector locked," she said to no one in particular. The fog thickened as she descended. Altitude dropped through 600 feet. The ocean surfaced briefly through the mist, then vanished again. She knew the deck was coming. She could feel it. A subtle updraft hit her left wing. That meant superstructure air brake. She was close. On the deck, they would be scrambling. She pictured the recovery crews, the radios flying back and forth, men shouting over turbine noise and running out calls she couldn't hear. None of it mattered now. She had 90 seconds when the sequence began. Now she was down to 30. The controller's voice cracked again, almost pleading, 0509er. We are not cleared for. Kendall didn't respond. Her breathing slowed. She adjusted the trim one final time and rested her hand lightly on the throttle. The aircraft rode smooth through the fog, altitude now below 300. Behind her, the silence of command authority pressed in. But Kendall was past asking. She had the stick, and she was still flying. Kendall's fingers rested lightly on the throttle. The A-18 Super Hornet held its glide with a calm that didn't match the urgency bleeding through her headset. Fog curled thick across the canopy, cloaking the carrier below in white silence. Instruments still worked. But visibility was gone. The deck radar had already vanished from the display. The ship's beacon would be next. Her mind filled the gap, not with panic, but with memory. It had started the same way in the simulator. A surprise drill, announced after a 16-hour duty rotation, low ceiling, failed gear, tailhook in-op, no barrier, then fuel loss. She remembered the voice of the instructor overhead, reminding her this wasn't a pass-fail module, just a test of compliance under pressure. But she hadn't complied. In the sim, she brought the aircraft down anyway, belly flared it across the deck, kept the fuselage intact, 92.0 stability on descent, no overshoot, no bounce. She exited the cockpit without damage logged. And still, she failed. They said her judgment was delayed, that she ignored established ejection criteria. Her notes on drag reduction angles and speed decay were redacted in the final review. Her name came off the advanced track the next day. Now, in the real aircraft, her hands moved with the same rhythm. Flaps adjusted. Trim compensated. Every shift mirrored what she had done in that simulator bay 2 months earlier. The checklist was never printed, but she had memorized it line by line. Maintain pitch angle, throttle idle, fuel flow under 20%, hold center line based on glide feel, not visuals. In the debrief after that simulation, one of the evaluators had looked at her with a strange expression. He asked why she hadn't ejected when the criteria were met. She told him the aircraft was still flyable. He shook his head and said, "That wasn't your call." But it had been. It was now. She tapped the side panel lightly, listening to the tone shift in the airflow. The carrier had to be within range. She adjusted rudder trim by 1%, watching for the vertical buffer to respond. The jet vibrated slightly, confirming proximity. In the sim, that vibration had been her trigger point. A narrow cue, just a few seconds long, where lift and drag met with perfect balance, enough to ride the glide onto steel without bouncing or breaking apart. Her file never mentioned that. The official printout said she had hesitated, that her calm under pressure was misread as emotional detachment. One evaluator had called it disconcerting. Another wrote she lacked instinctive aggression. Now, no one could see her face. They couldn't read her stillness or misinterpret her tone. There was only the flight path, the sound of the wind, and the shrinking time. She flexed her gloved fingers, same gloves she wore in the sim. The stitching along the right index finger had come loose weeks ago. A soft edge she always noticed when switching frequencies. That small imperfection had been with her in the mock-up. It was with her now. No one had believed her when she landed that sim. Not the instructor, not the observers, not even the system that flagged her flight as anomalous. It wasn't standard procedure. It wasn't in the doctrine. But it worked. The irony tasted dry. She had already solved this once. Quietly, without ceremony. And no one had believed her. They would believe the landing, or they wouldn't. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she still had 30 seconds of fuel, and the deck was somewhere beneath the clouds. She wasn't improvising. She was remembering. Kendall dropped the nose by 2 degrees and feathered the throttle to idle. The A-18 Super Hornet began to descend in earnest now, cutting through the final layer of fog with a hum that barely rose above her own breath. She didn't blink. Airspeed was steady at 130 knots. Altitude was decreasing in smooth increments. The fuel warning had already stopped flashing. There was nothing left to warn her about. The carrier was still invisible, lost below the white curtain of sea mist. She could feel its presence more than see it, a soft shift in air texture, the invisible buffer of metal and heat waiting just below the clouds. She glanced at the HUD. No landing indicators. No grid. The screen shimmered briefly, then failed to resolve. It didn't matter. She knew what she was looking for. She had already landed here once in simulation. This was the same math, only real, behind her. The radio buzzed with tension, voices stacked, tower and command bleeding over each other. They said words like abort, wave off, barrier offline. She ignored them, not because she was reckless, but because they didn't understand that she wasn't flying the aircraft anymore. She was solving it. She called softly, almost to herself, 200, steady, flare angle locked. The jet responded with a gentle dip. Her fingers moved in small increments. No sudden corrections. She eased into the descent profile as if it were a script being recited. Her left hand hovered over the flap control. Her right kept the nose level with one subtle pressure on the stick. The aircraft listened. Below her, the fog opened just enough to show a sliver of contrast gray on deeper gray. That was the bow. She counted the deck positions in her head. 1, 2, 3. She was lined up for the angled landing strip, not the center line. No cables, no hook, no gear, just steel and airflow. The flight crew on deck had cleared the immediate zone. Emergency lights flashed, but the barrier net was still coiled to one side. No one had time to ready it. One crewman crouched behind a blast shield, headset pressed tight, watching the approach with wide eyes. He mouthed something she couldn't hear. Others watched from doorways, barely breathing. From the tower, someone repeated, "We have no clearance for landing. I repeat, we cannot recover this aircraft." She said nothing. At 100 feet, Kendall shifted her pitch up half a degree to bleed speed. The stall warning flickered. She let it flicker. The angle was intentional. She rode the lift envelope until the nose trembled at the edge of control. Then she leveled out. 50 feet, airspeed 120 knots, flaps full, no bounce margin. 30 feet, she whispered again. Hold trim, let her ride. Then the steel appeared. It came up fast, not like a blur, but like a judgment. The nose crossed the deck lip at 97 knots. The main fuselage followed, suspended for a breathless instant before contact. The F-A-18 hit the deck with a shriek of metal and salt. The first sound was friction. No impact, just scraping, long and terrible. A drawn-out scream of metal on metal as the jet's belly dragged across the angled platform. Sparks burst from the underframe. Shredded plating curled backward like torn foil. The airframe vibrated with each meter gained. The engines flamed out together. Wind rushed the canopy. Inside, Kendall held steady. No bounce, no fireball, just resistance. The aircraft slowed, groaned, and finally stopped 20 feet from the forward safety line. Smoke rose in lazy trails from the fuselage. The canopy hissed with residual heat. Silence followed. Then, chaos. Deck crew sprinted forward, unsure if the jet was about to detonate or break apart. One man reached for the crash foam nozzle. Another radioed medical, but the cockpit didn't explode. The fuselage didn't split. The nose wheel well was gone, sheared flat, but the shell was intact. From the tower, a voice cracked. Say again, what aircraft just landed on this deck? No one answered right away. The crew chief reached the nose. He stared through the smoke at the figure inside. Helmet on, harness clipped. Still breathing. He banged once on the canopy. Kendall's hand reached up and pulled the lever. The shell lifted with a pressurized hiss. Kendall sat upright, soaked with sweat. Her visor lifted. She blinked at the sudden light and unlatched her harness. Every muscle in her arms felt like metal, but her hands didn't shake. She stood slowly in the seat, then stepped down onto the wing. Boots landing firm on scorched plating. The crew chief stared at her. "You're not Price," he said quietly. "No," she replied. She walked across the wing, eyes on the torn deck beneath her. Skid marks ran nearly 40 meters, blackened and bright with friction residue. Her gloves were still on. Her knees ached from the locked position she had held. Her hair stuck to her face. On the comms, someone whispered, "That's the observer. That's Kendall." Another voice followed. She wasn't cleared to fly. A third, lower now. She just landed a bird with no wheels. All eyes turned toward her. The flight deck, normally loud with protocol, was utterly still. A wind shifted across the steel, brushing her sleeves. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She stepped off the wing onto the deck and kept walking, smoke curling behind her, her boot prints cutting through the vapor like a final signature. For a moment, no one moved. The jet sat motionless at the end of the angled deck, steam rising from the fuselage in slow spirals. The tail was blistered with heat scars. The nose was flattened against the steel, its underframe carved raw from the landing. The cockpit canopy remained closed, fogged from the inside. Deck crews stared from the sidelines, half crouched, unsure whether to approach. Emergency teams waited, foam cannons half raised, eyes trained on the silent airframe. From above, the control tower scanned with binoculars. No signal, no comms. Then a hiss broke the stillness. The canopy lifted. Inside, Kendall sat motionless for another full beat. Her arms were heavy, her face pale with sweat, but her posture remained composed. She unclipped the harness, adjusted her balance, and rose. A figure in the wrong seat. A woman in the back. One of the younger deckhands exhaled audibly. "That's not Price." The crew chief pushed forward, waved off the emergency team, and stepped beneath the ladder rail. "Hold back," he called out. "Hold until medical confirms." The control tower crackled again, more confused than firm. "Say again. Who just landed that aircraft?" Another voice came from further back, quieter, slower. "Check the roster. 509er. "Roster says Lieutenant Price," the reply snapped. "Price is unconscious. He didn't touch the landing." That voice came from the med team, now at the front. They had reached the forward seat and were hoisting Price out, still limp and dazed, barely coherent. One of them tapped the comm unit on his vest. Front seat incapacitated. Rear seat controlled the descent. A silence fell across the deck. The words had weight. Kendall stepped down carefully from the wing. Her boots hit the scorched skid path, leaving a dry print in the soot. She removed her helmet and tucked it beneath one arm. Her flight suit was soaked through the back. Her gloves, still on, were worn at the palms from friction against the throttle. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. A petty officer near the comm relay finally said it. "Who the hell just put a bird on this deck with no wheels?" A pause. Then someone else, from just behind the blast shield, answered without looking up. "Cadet Kendall, sir, backseat." That name spoken aloud spread across the carrier like wind over steel. The air changed. In the tower, a clipboard dropped. On the bridge, someone turned from the map screen and stepped forward toward the window. Another voice, this one tense and certain, reached for the radio. "Get command eyes on deck. Now." Kendall stood beside the wrecked jet, arms relaxed at her sides, helmet under one arm. She watched as Price was carried past her, medics working fast, the IV line already in place. No one looked at her the same way anymore. The crew that had mocked her now formed a line without planning to. Some stepped back. One crew chief nodded at her, then stared at the scorched deck behind her. "That wasn't a landing," he muttered. That was a threaded needle. Another technician whispered, "She shouldn't have made it through that gap. That glide slope was suicide." The crew chief turned back to her. His voice was flat, not cruel. "You ran the stick." Kendall nodded. "How?" Her answer was quiet, almost buried in the wind. "Same sim you pulled me from." There was nothing else to say. Someone jogged down the tower stairs. Another officer arrived from the control bay, headset askew. People moved without knowing what to do, stepping around the jet as if it were sacred now. A reporter embedded with the Navy Public Affairs team started lifting a camera, then lowered it again. This wasn't for broadcast. Not yet. Kendall walked away from the aircraft slowly, not because she was trying to create a moment, but because her legs weren't fully steady. Her body had not caught up with what her mind had done, but she didn't stumble. She reached the deck edge near the operations cart and set her helmet down. Someone offered her a water bottle. She took it, nodded, said, "Thank you." No one laughed. No one called her wheels up. Behind her, a group had formed around the path her jet had carved. The metal was etched deep where the fuselage had kissed the steel. 40 meters of burn and scrape. The lines were curved slightly intentional, precise. No one could look at them and say, it had been luck. Another technician muttered, "We're going to frame this whole line." Someone else added, "We should mark it, like a nameplate." A third one chimed in, "We've never seen anything like that, not even in drills." The commander from Ops finally arrived, breath tight, boots clanging against the steps. He stopped at the edge of the damage path, arms crossed, gaze narrowed. He looked at Kendall. "You should not be standing here," he said. She didn't respond. He stepped forward and said, "Lower this time." "But you are." A final voice from someone back near the med tent called to him. She landed it without wheels. "Sir, no hook, full belly run," and she walked out. He didn't nod. He just turned back to look at the path. He followed the black line scorched across the deck and said nothing. The system hadn't approved it, but the deck had recorded it anyway. The hum of the ship was steady beneath the floor. Kendall sat outside the debriefing room with her gloves in her lap, both hands resting flat. The corridor was dim, painted in muted grays, lit by narrow fixtures spaced too far apart. No one had spoken to her directly since the landing. Someone had escorted her to this chair. Someone else had left a bottle of water beside her boot. She hadn't opened it. She stared at the closed door ahead, listening to the rhythm of her own breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Her knees were dusty. Her flight suit smelled like engine vapor and scorched wiring. She hadn't asked for a change of clothes. She wasn't sure she'd earned one yet. The door finally opened. A commander stepped out tall, dark uniform, folder in hand. He didn't motion for her to stand. He just held the door and said, "Inside." She rose without a word and entered. The room was small. Plain table. 2 chairs. No insignia on the walls. No windows. Just a console blinking with standby code and a file open on the screen. Her file. The commander sat across from her and opened the folder. Inside were printouts black and white. Margin notes. Highlighter marks. He glanced down at the top sheet, then looked up at her. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" She answered without pause. "Same sim you pulled me from." He nodded once, not as approval, more like confirmation. He turned the folder so she could see. "You landed inside 3 meters of center line. No HUD, full manual. You held pitch through dual wind shear. Ground effect flare was exact, even with 0 cable. You stopped within 20 feet of barrier margin." She didn't respond. He tapped the last sheet. That wasn't a bailout. He let the words settle. That was a maneuver. Kendall sat still. Her heart had slowed, but her chest still felt tight. He closed the folder. "Commands reviewing the incident. It's already being flagged as instructional material. The footage will circulate by tomorrow. Engineering's calling the glide path unprecedented. That aircraft should have skipped off the deck. It didn't." Still, no apology. Just facts. Just records catching up to something that had already happened. The commander stood and walked to the console. He typed something into the screen, scrolled, then clicked. The flight board appeared roster of pilots, upcoming assignments, line by line. He scanned to the bottom and added a name. Kendall, primary rotation, week 5, red cycle. She watched him do it. You're on the rotation now, he said. Backseat, she asked. He turned, his expression unreadable. No, he said, front. You already took the stick. She nodded. It was the only answer she had left. He handed her back the gloves, still dusty, still curled from heat. That'll be all, he said. She stepped out into the corridor again, blinking at the low light. Her shoulders felt heavier, but her spine stayed straight. As she made her way toward the hangar bay, voices faded into silence around her. Not from dismissal, from awareness. Someone cleared the hallway ahead. Someone else nudged a technician to move aside. An officer glanced her direction, didn't speak, and stood a little straighter. She didn't notice most of it, but she did notice the junior pilot standing near the bench by the ready room. He looked 20, maybe 21, with 2 clean boots and a radio clipped awkwardly to his vest. He had laughed at her 2 days ago. He had called her wheels up when she passed him in the mess. Now he held out something. Her helmet. Cleaned, visor polished, no scorch marks. I think this is yours, he said. She took it from him without speaking. Sorry, he added. She nodded once. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. In the ready room, the crew board had already been updated. Her name was there now. Not handwritten, not penciled, typed. Same font as the others, not marked as observer. No one made an announcement. No one gathered around. But a few eyes met hers, and none of them looked away. She passed the break table and someone pushed out a chair. She didn't sit. She walked past it, heading toward the stairwell. Each bootstep sounded louder than the last, not because she was stomping, just because no one else was moving. The hangar bay was cooler than the corridor. Salt air filtered through the vents. She crossed toward her locker, opened it, and set her gloves inside. Outside, she could hear engines starting up again. The carrier hadn't stopped moving. Neither had the rotation. Everything on board resumed because it had to. But something had shifted. A quiet realignment of names, ranks, and roles. She had entered the room as a question. She had walked out as an answer. She reached for her checklist binder. Its corners were still creased from her last sim. She thumbed the edge, opened it, and checked the tab for emergency descent. There was nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove. But still she'd prepare like she always had. Every system, every variable, every path. She had outlived the verdict they gave her. And now the system had no choice but to follow. You just heard the story of a woman who was dismissed, overlooked, and assigned to the back seat until the moment came when silence was no longer an option. Kendall did not ask for recognition. She prepared in the shadows, trusted her training, and acted when no one else could. Her landing was not an act of defiance. It was an act of clarity. A reminder that value is not always loud, and that strength does not always seek attention. In a world shaped by rank, rules, and assumptions, she proved that competence speaks loudest when the system stops listening, and when it mattered most, she was already ready. If her story moved you, take a moment to reflect. What does it mean to know your worth, even when others do not share your thoughts in the comments and follow for more quiet, powerful stories of courage, skill, and the heroes we nearly missed?